Hi everyone, my name is Muse, and today I'm going to be talking to you about video game composition, connecting sight and sound. Video game composition requires the ability and skills to think visually, verbally, and orally. Okay, so basically you have to think in terms of the imagery that you're seeing, the story that you're getting, the dialogue, etc., and the sound. Most people actually know more about this than they really think. Most people I know listen to a lot of music. Music is the soundtrack to our lives. We listen to music on the way to work. We listen to it at the gym. We listen to it when we're just hanging around our house. So music is really about mood. It's about mood enhancement. Does anybody here not listen to music on a regular basis? Okay, good. We're in a good route there. Video game composition is really about enhancing and supporting the mood of what you're already playing. So what makes a successful video game soundtrack? Appropriate instrumentation and vocals for the scenarios at hand. So to do that, you might want to know something about orchestration if this is the kind of work that you're doing. You might want to know what kind of instruments in the field of orchestration music theory are associated with different moods. Strings, brass, keyboards, percussion, all that sort of thing. The use of varied sounds, but with a unified theme. So some soundtracks are very big, like the one I'm about to talk about. Some soundtracks are very small, but if you listen to a good video game soundtrack, you will consistently hear similar groupings of instruments. You'll hear similar musical themes. You might hear the same pattern more than once, so forth and so on. Well-placed dynamics means an appropriate level of volume. So, for a sad scene, the music might be very soft and very quiet. For a big epic battle scene, the music is going to be very loud and bombastic. Telling stories without words is very, very important with video game soundtracks because a lot of video game soundtracks do not have lyrical music. Some of them do, but not all. But overall, your goal when you're composing a video game soundtrack is to enhance gameplay, to encourage total player immersion, or what is also referred to as flow. So I don't know about you guys, but if I'm playing a really good game, especially one that has a good soundtrack, very good, audio, I can get stuck in it for hours at a time without even really paying attention to where I am or how much time I'm spending on it, which is dangerous, but is ultimately the point of the game. Big moods. So to return to the orchestration thing I was talking about, these types of groupings are things that you'll see a lot in the study of orchestration. For sad moods, you'll see a lot of strings, especially like violin, viola, cello, woodwinds like clarinet, very deep voiced instruments, and piano. Piano is just a very versatile instrument. You'll hear it in almost everything. For epic and adventurous scenes, like battle scenes, you'll hear a lot of brass, so trumpet, trombone, tuba, stuff like that. You'll hear synths, piano, very large percussion, like bass drum. For romance, strings, flute, harp, piano, very just, light or high-voiced kind of instruments. Horror, I think, is a little trickier because you can use almost any instrument to convey a sense of horror and tension in a scene, but very frequently I'll hear percussion like snare, very lightly tapped cymbals, improvised sounds. But yeah, very tense strings, especially violin. I hear a lot of violin in horror soundtracks, and surprisingly enough, trombone. Trombone is a very spooky instrument if played appropriately. So these are obviously this is not an exhaustive list. There are many different kinds of moods that you can create with a good video game soundtrack. These are just a few. So a prime example of a video game that has an incredible soundtrack is World of Warcraft, which is probably part of the reason I've spent so many hours on it. So this is a very poorly rendered image of a night elf. And night elves are one of my favorite races from World of Warcraft. They're very elegant and artistic, but they're also very wild and nature-like. with their worship of the moon goddess, etc. So I'm going to play you something. So I want you to, while the music is playing, I want you to examine the image and kind of correlate what you're hearing with the mood of the art. There's sort of some ethereal sounds, there's some ethereal light. You can hear some nature sounds in the background. It's very kind of mysterious, you know? So this is from the World of Warcraft Cataclysm soundtrack, which, despite the expansion being terrible, the soundtrack was among the best. This is called Nightsong. So it has a mysterious air, very high soprano vocals that contributes to that ethereal quality. You hear strings, you hear harp, there's high-toned percussion, there's synth. As you get further into the soundtrack, there's very heavy bass percussion, almost aggressive sounding beats and strings. So it really conveys not just the etherealness, but that wild, very in touch with nature sense that the Night Elves tend to have throughout the game. So this is an example of what I'm talking about, the music enhancing the imagery of what you're seeing. And a lot of the Night Elf music is like that. When you go through different zones that are specifically elven, you'll hear a lot of music that's very like this, very light, and some of it's very wild and very aggressive. This is one of my favorite songs. Sorry. All right, so if you are interested in becoming a video game composer, study music as much as you possibly can. Go to university, go to college, take classes on Coursera, come to lectures like the ones we're having. Talk to musicians, go to shows, listen to people play, figure out what's good about what they're playing, what's not so good about it. Take private lessons, etc. Study art, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive at first, but a composer that has a good working knowledge of art, especially character art, landscape designs, anything like that, is going to have a much easier time connecting the sound that they're trying to produce with what they're seeing. Because when you get a video game, there's not going to be any sound. You have to make it. So if you have a good sense of artistic value with visual art, you're much more likely to be successful. And that's a thing that doesn't have to be inherent. It is a cultivated skill. It's not something you're born with. It's not an inherent talent, etc. You know this. Listen to a lot of music if you don't already, maybe even music that you don't necessarily love. Because you might have to compose music that you don't love from time to time. The biggest thing to remember is listen for patterns. Even when not just when you're playing video games, when you're watching films, you might hear repeated patterns for certain characters. You might hear the same instrument groupings, the same musical motifs. For specific locations, you might hear the same music over and over and over again. So definitely listen for patterns. Try it out. Do a Ludum Dare game challenge, do an Include game challenge, global game jam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. See if you're good at it. See if you like it, more importantly. But if you like it, you can get good at it. So last but not least, thank you for listening to my nonsense. If you have any questions or you would like to take music lessons from me, please feel free to email me at the listed address and support me on Patreon. You'll get so much good stuff like music and fiction and art and all kinds of good stuff.